I'm Spencer Mazyck, and joining me now is lawyer turned novelist Tara Conklin. She is the author of The House Girl. Her debut novel links the stories of an artistically talented 19th century slave and an ambitious young lawyer in contemporary New York. Welcome, Tara. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you, Spencer. It's a delight to be here.
So, Tara, I want to get right to the book because I think it's an incredibly powerful and compelling story with such rich characters. So can you tell us about the two main characters, Josephine Bell and Lena Sparrow? Who are they and what are they searching for?
Yeah, Josephine is a house slave on a failing tobacco plantation in 1852 Virginia. And Lena Sparrow is a young lawyer working in a New York City corporate firm in 2004 New York. And Lena is assigned to work on a slavery reparations lawsuit. And it's Lena's job, it's a class action suit, and it's Lena's job to find a lead plaintiff for the lawsuit. And Lena is the daughter of an artist. And it's through her father that she finds out about this controversy that is roiling the art world, which is that the world famous paintings thought to have been done by a white woman named Luann Bell are now, in fact, believed to be the work of her house slave, Josephine. And so Lena becomes very taken with this story, and she decides to find a descendant of Josephine Bell's to serve as a lead plaintiff in this lawsuit. And as she's uncovering the story of Josephine, she's also learning things about her own family and about the mysterious death of her mother when she was 4.
Yeah, it's a very complex story, very well written, I have to say. And aside from Lena being a lawyer in New York City, do you share any other similarities with either Lena or with even Josephine?
Let's see. Yeah, everyone just assumes that Lena is autobiographical because because she's a lawyer and she works in New York, and I used to work in New York. But I mean, I think Lena, she's a lot different than I am. She goes sort of straight to law school after college, straight into a big firm practice when she graduates. And she's really trying to define herself in opposition to her father. Her father's kind of this bohemian artist, and she grew up with a lot of instability in her life, financial instability and personal instability. And so she's really looking for something solid, something predictable, and kind of an easy path forward. And corporate law is that for her. I mean, that wasn't the things that drew me to practice law were very different than that. I worked for a number of years before I went to law school. I worked for an NGO, a nonprofit organization called the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, which is now called Human Rights First. But there were a lot of lawyers doing human rights work that really inspired me, and that was why I went to law school.
How did you come up with the idea for this story, which isn't necessarily about slavery as much as it just focuses on one particular slave?
Yeah. Well, it was a long and winding road that resulted in the novel as it now is. I mean, I started writing. I've always written stories just as kind of a way to entertain myself, and I would just kind of write a story and then put it aside. But I started writing the story of a slave doctor named Caleb Harper, which is now the last narrative to appear in the book. But that was the place where the whole novel began. And I wrote this story about a slave doctor, a doctor who works for a fugitive slave catcher. And 2 women appeared in his story, Josephine Bell, the house slave and artist, and then a white woman who works on the Underground Railroad named Dorothea Rounds. And I just became really obsessed with these characters and with learning more about them. And so I started to write their stories. And then I just kind of kept writing. And it just got longer and longer. And eventually I thought, I've got to do something with this. This is not the same as the other stories that I've been scribbling and keeping in my laptop for years,
I really enjoyed the historical part of the book. So how much research did you do beforehand, and did you discover anything surprising in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I did a fair amount of research. I read a lot of slave narratives. I read history books about the antebellum time period and the Underground Railroad. I did a lot of research online. There are a lot of primary documents you can find online. Particularly when writing Caleb's section and Dorothea's section, which are both written in letter form, I found a lot of letters from the time period and just really, spent a lot of time reading them and studying the language that was used. And in terms of what was surprising to me, I mean, I think, I guess one thing that was surprising is just, how many stories are out there from this time period that I didn't know about. And one thing, I started this when I was living in London, and I thought to myself, oh, when we go back to the States, I'll go and I'll visit the National Slavery Monument and I'll visit the National Slavery Museum, in order to do some more hands-on research. And I was surprised that these things do not exist.
Yeah.
And it's funny how many people I talk to, as I've gone around, on the book tour and just doing readings and talking to people about the book, how many people, I mean, particularly white people, don't know that. I mean, which I think it is surprising that, there's no national monument to the thousands and thousands of slaves that lived and died in this country. And, yeah, I found that very surprising.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There isn't also a national museum dedicated to the subject. One of the other things that I found surprising in the book, or not surprising, but I found interesting, was this inclusion of a chart that lists the real names of slaves and the kind of harm that they suffer. What was the reason for this inclusion?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I was doing a lot of research, and at a certain point, I just found it very overwhelming. It was so immense, the tragedy of this time period and the individual tragedies that were delivered on the slaves, and I kind of had to stop reading. I kind of had to just say, I'm not writing about slavery. I'm writing about Josephine. And but at the same time, I felt like I would be really remiss if I didn't at least try to get across the enormity of it. And so that was an effort to get across the scale. And I mean, it was, it's still very small. I mean, there were 2 pages of names, and obviously, 250 years of slavery. It would fill a very, very, very long book, all of the names. But that was why I did that, to try and get across some sense of the scale to the reader.
And Tara, you mentioned that you actually started writing some of these historical narratives like Caleb's and Josephine's while you were still practicing law at White Case. So how and when did you decide to stop practicing and to focus on writing full time?
Yeah, it was a tough decision, as I'm sure you can appreciate. There were a lot of things going on. I was kind of nearing that point in my career. I'd been with White Case for about 7 years. So it was the, try to work myself to the bone to make partnership, or, try or do something else. I mean, I was in the London office, and it's a pretty small department that I was working in, and there weren't a lot of options. I also had 2 young kids. There weren't a lot of options for sort of part-time or, flexible working arrangements. And I had done a fair amount of work on the novel at this point, and it was really, it had just taken hold of me. And I thought, I don't think I want to, I just decided I didn't want to go down the path of partnership. And I don't know if, it was even a possibility, to be frank. And so, I sat down with my husband, and we decided that we also were kind of done with living in London. He's English and born and bred Londoner, and we just wanted to give sort of a new lifestyle a try. And so we did.
So, and you and your husband, then your family, you were prepared for whatever the financial consequences would be.
I mean, we had some savings, and when I left White Case, they do this thing in England, which is called voluntary redundancy. I don't know if you're familiar with that term.
No, I haven't heard it before.
Yeah, this is in 2000. It's a great concept. This is in 2009, and White Case was doing a round of layoffs, and everything was, this was the financial collapse, and they do this thing where they first offer voluntary redundancy, where you can basically volunteer to be fired, and, which is actually, I wish that they did it in this country, because if there are people who want to leave and you're going to do layoffs, of a percentage of your workforce, it just makes sense, and the people who want to go should be allowed to go, right?
Right,
So,
of course.
and so I volunteered. I volunteered to be fired, and so I had a severance package as part of that, and we had some savings, and we downsized our life. We moved out of London, which is probably the most expensive city in the world to live, and we moved to Seattle, Washington, where we live now, where I have some family, and we just kind of changed a lot of things about our life, and yeah, and so I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, it was a financial hit for sure, and it was pretty scary particularly for the first sort of I thought, okay, we've got, give me a year. I was like, Nick, give me a year, I'll finish the book in a year. And, it didn't quite happen after a year. I finished it. It took about 18 more months of me writing full time.
You said that you've been writing practically your entire life, and I know that some of the work has probably been for your eyes only, but did you always know that at some point you would retire from law to just become an author?
I mean, I knew that was sort of how I justified it to myself, that I would, that when I retired, I would finally be able to write, that I could, my father just retired, and he's kind of, knocking around the house and kind of bored, and I remember thinking, like, oh my God, I can't wait till I can retire so that I can just write, finally. And then it just got to the point where I couldn't wait that long,
So you volunteered yourself to be fired, as you said.
Really.
What advice would you have for other lawyers who are also looking to make the jump from law to novelist?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, write. Like, I had just, apply the same work ethic that you do to law to your writing, and make every minute count, because I mean, for the first, while I was working on the historical sections, I was still working full time, and it was definitely, I was exhausted a lot of the time, and I would write after I put my kids to bed at night, or when I came home from work, and it definitely was a difficult time. But I think if you really want to do this, you've got to put in the time and just sit your butt in the chair and write.
Tara, I was just thinking about your background and the degrees that you've collected up until this point. It seems as though, would you say that your education was perfect for writing this particular book about art, history, and justice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that justice issues, is something that has always interested me. And so, in a lot of ways, this is my first novel. This is basically what I've been thinking about for the past, 40 years. So, but I'm working on a second novel now that's a lot different. And I think that my legal training and my legal background is only going to help me no matter what subject I tackle, even if it's not, straightforward law in the way that this novel is.
And so you mentioned just a while ago that you're already working on the second book. Can you give us a bit of a preview? What's it about?
Sure. It's still, when I say working on it, I mean that I'm like thinking about it when I'm washing the dishes. So, so it's still very early. I've written some, but it's hard to write when you're doing promotion on another book. So it's about, it takes place in sort of contemporary Northeast, and it's about a family. It's about three sisters and the death of their brother in kind of a sudden, tragic way, and how they come to grips with his death and with his life, I guess, in a nutshell.
Well, we can't wait until that one is available for purchase. And I also want to say congratulations again on your debut novel, The House Girl. Thanks very much for joining us today, Tara.
Thank you so much, Spencer. It was my delight.
For more information on this or other topics, subscribe to BloombergLaw.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody.